My guest on the program today is Dr. Ben Carson. He is author of, a new book, One Nation. He's author of, many books. How many so far?
That's the sixth one.
Sixth one, and, a fantastic book, certainly thought-provoking indeed. The most bizarre question we've had, Dr. Carson, is from somebody who says, One Nation, was the name of the book inspired by the song One Nation Under a Groove by the group Funkadelic? Can you answer that question for us?
That's a funny question. No, it was not inspired by that, but it was inspired by the fact that I recognize that strength comes from unity. And e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And what is destructive is when we begin to allow the forces to tear us apart. And that's why we gave it that particular title.
Of course, part of the full quote, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is the ideal of the American nation, not necessarily the reality today.
Well, one of the things, the second group of words there, under God, is under severe attack in the United States, with many believing that we shouldn't even be talking about God.
Is that even possible in American society? The so-called, the only sacred thing is the separation of church and state in American politics now.
Separation of church and state, I think, is a very important concept, but it has nothing to do with separation of God and state. Yeah. And there was never any intention by the founders that God be completely separated from our lives, or that we not live lives of faith. It was simply that we didn't want the church ruling the government, and we didn't want the government ruling the church. Yep. That's all. And people have continued to misinterpret that. And interestingly enough, if you look at the neo-Marxist literature, they talk a lot about the fact that the United States is the stick in the mud to the New World Order. And in order to bring it down, you've got to attack the two strongest pillars, the traditional family and the Judeo-Christian faith. And if you're a student of American history, you can see that over the last 40 years, those are the things that have been under steady attack.
People say, well, perhaps the West won the Cold War, but these two pillars still very much under attack around the world.
Very much so. And, I encourage people in the book to stand up for their beliefs. At the end of each chapter, we have like 4 action steps. What you can do, not only to empower yourself, but collectively what you can do to empower your society, your community.
That's one of the things I love about the book. It's not a political treatise, although it has some political philosophy in there. It's very hands-on, practical stuff. You're not just pointing out the problems with society, but some practical tips that each citizen of a civil society can take to make our society a better place.
Exactly, because a lot of times people, after they read a book, they're all inspired. But what can I do? Just pour a little on me. What can I do?
Yeah.
This hopefully answers that question.
Well, certainly your own example of somebody who wasn't born into the best of circumstances, who, ignored the statistics and certainly made himself into a person of influence.
Yes.
That example, if you multiply that through the citizens in any society can change.
And any great movement historically generally starts with a person. Not with 1,000 people, but with a person, with an ideal, who has courage and the fortitude to stand up for what they believe in.
Any movement, though, also needs a leader. Now, since the controversial prayer breakfast, there's been rumours about whether or not you would consider taking office, even running for the highest office in the United States, some would say the world, that of president. Is this something that you have been thinking about, praying about?
I've definitely been praying about it. It's not something that I particularly wish to do. You've probably noticed that anybody who goes into that office, whether they're there for 4 years or 8 years, look like they've been there for 20 years. I don't particularly want to go through all that stress. But I do understand that sometimes circumstances lead to situations where you have to respond. So, I've been praying to God to give me wisdom, discernment. Obviously, there's a large number of people who are clamoring for me to do this in the United States. But I can't allow that to influence me. I have to be able to look at things more objectively than that. And a lot will be told in November of this year with the midterm elections. Do the people want to continue down a path of government control of everything in your life? or do they want to move back to a nation that is for of and by the people? And that will inform a lot of the way that I think about this.
Some very interesting principles, whether or not you're involved in the running or perhaps inspiring other people as you have done with your life so far. Now, the decision that you made when we started the interview talking about what inspired you to become a neurosurgeon, is a similar process as to whether or not you will sign up for politics?
Yeah, a very similar process. And just listening very carefully and looking to see what comes to be. Is somebody going to run who really inspires the people? Somebody who really understands the Constitution, someone who understands the concept of empowering people in their own lives, somebody who understands the economy and how to move it rather than how to stifle it by all these regulations and horrible taxation. Somebody who understands global geopolitical scenes, understands what's going on in the Middle East, what is ISIS, what is their purpose, rather than somebody who just reacts every time they do something. If that person came along, I wouldn't see any need to run.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will wait and see. I think it's quite interesting that your book, One Nation, is kind of battling for the number one spot with another book by a politician by the name of Hillary Clinton at the moment.
Yes, it is.
So perhaps we will see perhaps another battle between those two authors before the end of the year. We've got an election coming up in a couple of months here in New Zealand. What would you say to people in New Zealand to, I suppose, encourage them to get over the apathy, to not say, look, don't vote for politicians.
Sure.
It just encourages them. How can we engage with our society in a meaningful way?
Well, I talk a lot about that in the book, how voters have the responsibility to know who represents them and how did they vote. Not how did they say they voted, but how did they actually vote? And is it compatible with your thinking? Now, one of the reasons that people get so disgusted with politicians is because they go into a voting booth, they're looking for a party designation or a name that looks familiar. And that's about the extent of their knowledge. That's called irresponsible voting. And if people started being more responsible, I guarantee you they would get more responsible leaders.
Informed and prayerful decisions at the polling booth. Well, actually, hopefully the information and the prayers happen long before the polling booth rather than just,
I would hope so,
the random tick box. Well, we certainly appreciate your time here today, and I can't encourage enough people to get a hold of a copy of this book, One Nation, from Dr. Ben Carson. A pleasure to have you in the studio. Thanks
Wonderful
for joining us.
to be back with you. Thanks.